বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি।
Hello everyone, welcome to the Hindu analysis for 23rd August 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. Finance Ministry summons Infosys CEO or IT portal glitch. So as we know, the Infosys company won the bidding to build the new e-portal or the e-filing portal for the income tax department. Right? The government in May and kind of announced in May and launched in June 7th of this year a new e-filing portal that would be centered around making the filing process much easier. It would be a faceless process. It would be a smooth process and it would be an immediate process, meaning when the filing is done, it's an immediate processing system that is integrated into the filing portal. And if there is any issues, it would be resolved then and there. And if a taxpayer would receive some sort of a refund or a refund for the excess tax that they pay, the issuance of refund is also would be done on an instantaneous basis, right? So the idea was that this new e-filing portal would revolutionize the tax paying system or the tax filing system in our country. Now the idea was announced in May and it was launched officially in June 7th, and the contract to build the tax portal was allotted to Infosys company. So the track record of Infosys in terms of building infrastructure, IT infrastructure for Indian government is little bit shaky, in the sense that they were the company that was allotted or awarded the contract to build the GST portal also. Like how the income tax portal is facing issues right now, likewise when the GST portal was launched, it too had serious issues that Infosys had to rectify over a period of time. Now when you compare the issues during the launch of GST portal with the IT portal, there is a mountain of difference, because the issues with the IT portal are big and they have been pretty consistently poorly performing since its launch, right? As I said, the promise was that this is going to be an immediate process, immediate filing system, along with other host of features. If a taxpayer is to receive some sort of a refund, they would be initiated immediately, and there were other features that centered around making the filing process much easier. If there would be any grievances, or if there are any grievances, the grievance redressal system was also simplified. Now what has happened is that since the launch, most of the time the website has been facing glitches, software glitches. Many of the critical functionalities that the government promised that would be delivered through the portal weren't made available to the taxpayers. Many of the software iterations that came about, right, they were trying to rectify bugs on a pretty much day-to-day basis, but nonetheless majority of the issues weren't resolved. And it seems that the last straw for the finance ministry was when the entire website was down for a period of 2 or 3 days without any prior notice or without any valid reason, right? So since day one, they have been struggling to deliver on the promise of providing an seamless e-filing portal, but the company failed to do so. Now the issues are not simple, right? There were some OTP issues, there were some Aadhaar validation issues, there were password generation glitches, like there were multiple other filing issues. Even when filing was done, when the returns were filed, then also taxpayers would face some sort of an error or some sort of an issue. Now this was the persisting issues that were leading since June 7th. As a result of it, people were missing their deadlines, right? And as a subsequent result of that, the finance ministry or the income tax department had no other option but to extend IT return filing deadlines. So how long can you keep on doing that? There is some sort of a line that has to be drawn, because the income tax department cannot endlessly keep on extending the deadlines for filing your IT returns just because the software is glitchy, right? So that is something that has to be answered for. Again, this is being done by using public money, And as we know, as we discussed in the earlier, this is not the first time that Infosys has kind of botched up the job. During the GST also they did similar thing, but again that is another issue. But the problems with the IT filing portal was much more severe than that one of GST. So in order to make them aware of or give them some sort of an last warning before some sort of an action is taken against them, the finance ministry summoned the CEO of Infosys and has kind of asked them that solve these issues, otherwise we are going to face some more problems, right? The government had to intervene because Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has been tweeting about much of this portal for the last few days, right? So finally, after the meeting, the Infosys kind of made the website live again, stating that the emergency maintenance was completed and the portal was live. So moving on to the next article, high speed net comes to a deep jungle. So this is regards to long distance Wi-Fi facility being made available to tribal hamlets in Kerala's rural areas, particularly in Nilambu's forest areas, right? So the scheme that made these internet services available in these tribal hamlets is the Jan Shikshan Sansthan, right, which was known as Shramika Vidyapeeth, which was the earlier name of the scheme. The scheme is not oriented towards bringing in Wi-Fi services or internet services to rural areas, but the scheme is entirely a different scheme. The idea behind this central scheme or central sponsored scheme is that they would provide vocational skills to socio-economically backward people, right? They may be non-literate, they may be neo-literate, meaning semi-literate, as well as school dropouts, where they would identify each and every individual's abilities and interests. Then they would train that individual person in the skill he or she is interested in, and they would try to make them employable, right? They would try to enhance their skills by providing vocational training. The idea is that the training that is provided to through these kinds of institutions and these schemes are recognized by ITI similar certification, meaning they are employable in industry. The skills that they are being provided under the schemes are recognized, and they are professional level in the sense that they are recognized by the industry. They are industry standard level vocational training that is being provided, right? Now through this scheme, a sense of curriculum and training modules are developed that are on level or sometimes par with industrial standards, so that not only the training is imparted, at the same time they are being qualified or they are being made qualified for an skilled employment status. They would try to enrich, right? So this is again making sure that the skill that they are being imparted with, the skill that they are being trained with, can actually they can turn it into a job. So it's kind of a life enrichment component that is attached to this scheme. Now through this scheme and with the help of Railnet is the internet services of the Ministry of Railways, and through BSNL, the technology that is being used here is called the long distance Wi-Fi technology. This technology is specific because if you don't have any if you don't have any cables, if your line of sight is clear, if you don't have any obstructions in your line of sight, through using towers, right, you can transmit Wi-Fi or internet signals without any loss for up to 100 kilometers. And if you want to further the range, all you have to do is add one more repeater station or some sort of a similar tower or antenna, so that the signal can be further transmitted some other or farther distance. Now this is the technology that was used. The ability through this technology is that without any cabling or without any additional infrastructure, they can provide high speed internets to services that are generally unserviceable. So the condition here is simple. It should be a clear line of sight without any buildings or any natural obstructions, mountains or hills. So that can be overcome by adding some more towers, but nonetheless this technology, though not new, but new in the sense that the area which it is being deployed is new. Now again, this is done in few tribal hamlets deep inside the Nilambur jungle in Kerala. So this area is known for some Maoist activity, some Naxal activity. So the internet that is currently being provided is moderated in the sense that they maintain what happens, or they kind of oversee what goes on, because there is a real threat that anti-social elements or anti-national elements might use the services to benefit their own cause. So the network that is being provided is monitored and controlled, but nonetheless being provided with these services means that people living, students, particularly kids who are unable to go to colleges, schools because of COVID-19 and restrictions, now have access to online classes and any other training courses that are being provided through e-platforms. So again, I found this to be very interesting in the sense that these kinds of innovative ideas are what are needed for us as a country to move forward and reduce the digital divide that we have been seeing and we continue to see in our country. Mind you, the divide was already there. What was made aware was the fact that the presence of divide, we knew that divide was there, but to what extent we didn't anticipate, because it was a non-considering issue, because nobody thought that this would be an issue at one point or any other point of time. So moving on to the next article, fourth evacuation from Kabul since 1992, but in different international climate. So when we talk about evacuation of Indians, or particularly diplomatic staff from Kabul and Afghanistan in general, this is not the first time that has happened. Historically, since 1992, this is the fourth time that has happened. So what makes this evacuation different from the earlier three is the way the international community is reacting with or acting with Taliban. So earlier what has happened, in the first instance, when Taliban was overthrown, or Taliban took control of Afghanistan post the Soviet Union, or post the withdrawal of Soviet Union, is international community was not willing to engage with Taliban. What has changed considerably since 1990s is how international players, that is world players, are dealing and have dealt with Taliban. Right? This is the fourth time that we are pulling out of our diplomatic staff and our citizens from Afghanistan. This is not new for us. This is the fourth time. So what is different is how international community is willing to engage or act or has acted with Taliban. In 1993, India decided to close their diplomatic mission in Kabul. This was done as a reaction to a rocket attack that resulted in the death of a security personnel on the mission's ground, or the mission ground. As a result of it, the security of mission staff was at threat, so they decided to pull out Indian staff. Now the person who was responsible for that attack is currently the commanding officer, who is coordinating with the Taliban council members, and he is the one who is negotiating with Taliban regime, and he is the one who is actually overseeing the security at Kabul airport. Right, the player, he has been a known terrorist, and his forces are right now controlling security at Kabul airport. He is an old player known to Indian security forces and also international community as a designated terrorist. Now during that time, what happened was that our diplomatic staff were driven in 3 buses to Uzbek border. From there they were flown out of Tashkent to India. That is how they pulled out, and our ex-vice president Hamid Ansari was the diplomat who was serving there, and prior to that he served as ambassador to Iran, and he had some relationship there with General Rashid Dostum, who was the warlord that kind of controlled that territory. So with his connections, our ex-vice president's connection and his contacts in Afghanistan, through with the help of General Rashid Dostum, India was able to pull out its diplomatic staff in 1992 also, right? We sent our Indian Air Force AN-32 aircraft, and these aircrafts pulled out not only Indian ambassadors but ambassadors from other Asian countries. And this was at the point of time where the Taliban had Stinger missiles which were supplied to them by the CIA so that they can defeat the Soviet aircrafts. And they were using these Stinger missiles to not only bring down Russian aircraft but any other aircraft that they feel necessary. So again in 1996 we opened our embassy for about an year. Then again, due to given the security situation, the deteriorating security situation in Afghanistan, what was the precipitating event then? Taliban entered Kabul violently, not like how they entered in recent time. There was a lot of fighting between security forces of Afghanistan, tribal leaders or militias that are in allegiance with then President Najibullah, and there was a lot of fighting, and finally they entered Kabul violently by killing a lot of people, innocent people, and forces that are loyal to then President Najibullah. Later on, when they got control of Kabul, they dragged President Najibullah out of a diplomatic compound, or not even something else. It was a diplomatic compound. They dragged him out, they mutilated his genitals, and they hung him to a lamp post. He was brutally murdered in full public view, and that was a precipitating event where we decided that, again, not only India, many other countries at that point of time felt that the situation is fluid, and they decided to close the mission, to close the embassy, and they decided to pull out our diplomatic staff. Again, this was small compared to what is happening now and what happened during 1993 and 1992, because at that point of time we were maintaining a small staff in our embassy, and it was relatively a simple affair to pull out our diplomatic staff using a commercial flight. We didn't send any Air Force aircraft or anything like that. We used a Aerian commercial flight, and we got them out successfully. Since that point of time, since 1996 to 2001 is where America invaded Afghanistan by declaring war on terror, and that is when we saw the fall of Taliban began, right? But in between, from 1996 to 2001, India was actually supporting Northern Alliance, right? Northern Alliance is the opposition to Taliban. So from 1996 to 2001, India actively supported the Northern Alliance. Northern Alliance is the alliance of warlords, different ethnic tribal leaders who had their own army of fighters, their militias, and they all banded together and formed the Northern Alliance, and they put up a resistance against the advances of Taliban. What we are seeing right now in Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan is the same thing, but this was done during that period. This is the Northern Alliance 2.0. That is what we are seeing rising in Panjshir Valley right now. We'll discuss in later classes, but that is what is happening. So what was happening was, during 1996 to 2001, India was supporting Northern Alliance. We were contacting them. We were coordinating funds. Our ambassador in the Spain was actually supporting this Northern Alliance. We were trying to provide supplies to them. And we were contacting Masood, who was the leader, right? He was the General Masood Dostum was the leader of Northern Alliance. He was the focal point of Northern Alliance. And we were contacting him through Amarullah. The way we were contacting the Northern Alliance leaders is through Amarullah Saleh, who is the acting president of Afghanistan right now. He was our contact point. Through him, we were contacting Masood. Masood Dostum was assassinated by Al Qaeda right before 9/11 attacks. That was way how Al Qaeda got the blessings of and the security of Taliban. So Al Qaeda under Osama bin Laden carried out the assassination of General Masood, for which they were given protection and hiding place in Afghanistan. Right now, the Northern Alliance 2.0 that is we are seeing right now is currently being led by Masood San and Amarullah Saleh. Both of them are leading the resistance against the new resistance, that is Northern Alliance 2.0 against Taliban. Now, as I said, the situation what has changed is in the last 20 years or 25 years or so, when the first time we saw the rise of Taliban in Afghanistan, all the major countries in the world were against Taliban. Countries like China, Russia were negotiating, were maintaining some sort of a relationship behind closed doors. But publicly and in international forums, every country was shunning Taliban. They were against the idea of Taliban control over Afghanistan. But what has changed in the last 25 years is, first, by signing a deal with them and entirely bypassing the Afghan government, the Americans have legitimized them. On top of that, countries like Russia, countries like China, Pakistan has been doing it for a long period of time. So countries that are new to the game are new to this kind of a behavior are US, Russia and China. Particularly US has went on to a great extent and they have signed a deal outright with Taliban without inviting the Afghan government to the negotiations itself, and they legitimized the existence and the authority of Taliban through that. On the other face of it, you have Russia and China. They are inviting Taliban delegations to their capital cities. They are dining with them. They are holding talks. They are carrying out negotiations both in open and in closed doors, both in their capitals, that is either in Moscow or in Beijing in Chinese case, and Russia's case in Moscow, and also in Doha in Qatar, where representatives of all these countries are regularly meeting with the political leadership of Taliban who are residing in Qatar. So again, the idea is that this is not the first time that India had to evacuate its citizens or its embassy staff. Actually, this is the fourth time, and what major difference or what differentiates this time from the past is the way regional powers and international powers are dealing and negotiating with Taliban, which is again a worrying sign for India. Moving on to the next article, India signs deal for 70,000 assault rifles. So the Indian government finally signed an agreement or finally made a deal after repeated delays to procure AK-203 assault rifles and KA, that is 226, that is Kamov 226 utility helicopters from Russia. These negotiations have been going on since 2016, when Indian Army decided that the INSAS rifles that they have are not optimal for carrying out operations, right? They cannot even carry out day-to-day operations using the INSAS rifles because of major issues that these rifles had. So Indian Army was looking for replacement, critical replacement. Indian Army was looking to procure anywhere between 6 to 8 lakh assault weapons, assault rifles to arm its soldiers. Now, since 2016, the search has been going on, and they finally decided that they are going to buy AK-203 assault rifles from Russia. The idea was that, AK-203 is nothing but the next iteration of AK-47. You have AK-47, which has been tried and tested since World War II. AK-200 series is nothing but the next iteration, the modern iteration of AK-47. So AK-200 series is nothing but, or AK-203 is just one standard of AK-200 series. India is also going to purchase other variants of assault rifles, AK assault rifles, in the AK-2000 series. The differentiating factor between each rifle will be, or each type of rifle, variety of rifle is what kind of attachments that are attached to the core weapon. So that would make a difference. Apart from that, the weapon itself is same. It's the modern iteration of AK-47, AK-2000 series, AK-200 series, that is AK-203. India is buying some anywhere between 6 to 7 lakh weapons, out of which 70,000 weapons or 70,000 assault rifles will be off the shelf, meaning they are going to be directly imported from Russia. They have already been manufactured, or they are in the process of manufacturing those weapons, but nonetheless they come intact from Russia. Now the second part of the agreement is the rest of the weapons will be manufactured in India through a joint venture, Indo-Russia joint venture. Now the amount is anywhere between 6.7 lakhs to 8 lakhs depending on necessity. So they are not going to stop at 6.7. At the end of the day they are going to produce more than that, so that the market can be, the numbers can be adjusted and the requirements are met. But nonetheless the agreement right now calls for 70,000 of those assault rifles being directly imported from Russia and rest being manufactured in India through an Indo-Russia joint venture. And this is one part of the agreement. The second part of agreement is to purchase 200 Ka-226T helicopter from Russia. This is a light utility helicopter that we are purchasing from Russia. Again, the deal is similar. We are going to get some 60 out of the 200 off the shelf, or 40 from Russia. The rest are something like that. The 60 would be directly imported and 140 would be manufactured locally, and they would be built in India through Hindustan Aeronautic Limited. So again, this is again to fulfill our helicopter light utility helicopter needs. Our LUH light utility helicopter that HAL produced is actually serving our army right now. It has gone through multiple trials by both Army, Navy and Air Force. It is in the process of being inducted, but nonetheless this is again this deal was decided long back, and we decided that we need this variety of utility helicopters. So we went ahead and made an agreement to purchase 200 of those. So first we are buying assault rifles. This is not the first time that India recently brought weapons from Russia, right? We have various agreements. We have an frigate agreement with them. We are going to purchase 4 more frigates from them. I think in the next day or two we'll hear about that. Our past tie-ups or our past joint ventures with Russia resulted in BrahMos missiles. We have MiGs that we kind of bought from them, and we have Me helicopters that Indian Air Force uses. So our joint ventures with Russia have been historically successful, in the sense that the biggest success was the BrahMos missiles that we developed, because we not only developed one variant of it, we ended up developing 3 or 4 variants for various platforms. One we developed from surface to air, the second was surface to surface, air to air, and from underwater to surface for submarines. We are in the process of developing that too. So biggest success between for Indo-Russian joint ventures in weapon development is the BrahMos missile, named after Russian river and Brahmaputra river in India. We also purchased SIGs or weapons, assault rifles to be given to our frontline troops, right? Currently Indian Army or BSF, who are currently patrolling borders both in eastern part and the western part, actually carry SIGs or rifles which were procured on emergency basis from America. The idea was that these AK-203 assault rifles would be given to rest of the soldiers, rest of the armed forces, so that they can have a functional weapon with an effective range, which the INSAS was lacking. The functionality of INSAS was unstable, the accuracy, there were a lot of issues that INSAS suffered from. That was the reason that Indian Army was looking to replace that INSAS rifle, because it was too unstable and not accurate enough to meet the demands of the job. That is the assault rifles thing. Now moving on to the Ka-2260 helicopter. This is again a light utility helicopter. we are bringing them to mitigate or meet our immediate shortage of light utility helicopters that Indian Armed Forces are suffering. The idea is that they are going to supply 60 off the shelf, in the sense that 60 are going to be manufactured and 150 in the Indian are going to be manufactured in India. So the delay was that we were trying to finalize the technical specifications of the version that India is going to purchase from Russia, because there is a subtle difference when you import hardware from Russia. When they develop their weapons, they are designed and built in a way that suits their environment. When any platform, let us say it may be a fighter jet, it may be an helicopter, it may be an vehicle, anything that we try to import either from American side or the Russian side, particularly this problem we saw in Russian machinery or Russian equipment, is the operational range is limited to Russian climate, right? Russian conditions. When they are brought into Indian climatic conditions, these platforms tend to throw up some problems that had to be addressed. So the upgrade that we are asking in the KA-2260 Climber light utility helicopter is, we are asking for some new technologies to be added to improve its flight capabilities and technical characteristics. Particularly, we are asking the technical characteristic to be tweaked so that the platform, the light utility platform, will work in Indian conditions. Mind you, Indian conditions are not simple. It has to operate at high altitudes. It has to operate at extremely cold conditions and extremely hot conditions and extremely wet conditions. So the climatic range under which the platforms that either India builds or imports is huge. That is why it takes a lot of time for developing a single platform, whether it may be a tank, whether it may be an helicopter, whether it may be a vehicle, whatever it is. Any platform that India develops or tries to import has to be tweaked or modified so that it operates in all climatic conditions of Indian subcontinent. So again, in a long list of joint ventures, in a long list of procurement from Russia, this is an addition to all of that, where we are buying the AK-203 assault rifles in numbers up to 8 lakhs, and we are buying close to 200 light utility helicopters from Russia to meet our immediate needs. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি, প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা। বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি।